no one can see us or hear us when we go live.
We are live. Let's see, where do I want to share this? No, not that kind.
Oh, the kind where they can't see us or hear us.
Yeah, that kind. You know.
Yeah. It's like a time machine where you don't actually travel to the time that you wanted to go to.
Did I ever tell the Gauntlet folks that we were doing this? They figured it out.
I posted in the self promo.
There you go. That's worth it. Just tell them, hey, it's time.
Let me see here.
I already didn't add everyone. I really don't want. I should have done that earlier. Could be promoting this instead. Get really excited for Jess.
Okay.
All right, cool. You ready?
Yes.
All right.
Bum, bum, bum. Da, da, da.
We are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel. There's a chance that people could hear us the entire time that I had messing with all the sound stuff earlier.
You told
unmuted
me.
us. I said that. I don't know. Only the audience can tell us what they heard or what they didn't hear. But if you were just joining us, we are live here on Plus One. We could, says Not Alone Horror, on Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. My name is Tony Vicente. I'm Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP. Our hope and desire is to help amazing designers find great players who love their game, and amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. We do that in a lot of different ways, and every once in a while, like we do prestige classes, we do like interviews, right? And we'll talk to somebody about their creative process. We'll try to draw out lessons from that. But today we are doing a workshop that I first got to see at the Gauntlet Writers Retreat a few months back, and I am incredibly excited to finally have Mike Martens here on stream with us to talk about RPG layout for horrified beginners and the marginally talented. Mike, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, and where folks can find you on the internet?
Oh my gosh. I'll talk about this again through the presentation, but I am my day job is a UX content person, a manager of a team of UX writers, content designers, information architects, that kind of thing. Talk a little bit about what that means. And on the side, then I am doing this RPG stuff. So writer for Trophy, designer for Butter Princess that just won, both of those just won awards this summer.
Good job.
Sunken, you may have heard of. Sunken, a little independent spin-off of Trophy Dark, and other stuff coming up as well. So Planet Raygun, a retro sci-fi heist game, a crazy creepy game about that's a folk horror simulator that I'm not even sure if I should release because it's so dark, and a fun horror Christmas game where you try and prevent the clauses from destroying the world. And yeah, many other things. You'll get to see little teases of them here and there throughout this presentation as well.
Awesome. Very excited to have you with us. Also excited to have everybody in the chat. We've got Josh Dunham watching over on Facebook. We've got Signal Station here in the chat along with Not Alone, Ostrich Monkey, a whole lot of other people. I do love that I posted about this in like the promo channel of our Discord, which if you go to ttrpg.link/Discord, you can do it. No one paid attention. I posted it in the layout one and immediately everybody was like, I'm so excited about this. I can't wait. Also, what is that font? That tells you exactly what kind of server we have. They're like, yeah, we're used to promotion, but also if you're going to explicitly talk about layout, yes, we are excited and have lots of questions. So I'm really excited to kind of sit back and take things in. As people are watching, if you have questions, type them up. When it's convenient, I will interject them into the conversation asking Mike. That may mean sometimes I just interrupt Mike and say the thing because it's a funny bit that needs to happen right then. And other times I might wait until an appropriate pause or Mike asks for them. But any of those are options and on the table. So if you have questions, go ahead and toss them out. Even if they're totally disconnected and you just want to ask Mike something, go ahead and get those out of the way right now. But Mike, I'm going to kind of hand things over to you to take us into RPG layout, as only you can do.
Oh, I'm sure that other people can do this as well. That's the whole point.
Other people can talk about layout, but only you can talk about layout as you talk about layout.
Well, and right now at 5:07 p.m. Pacific time, I guess it is up to me to save the world.
It is.
So let's do this. I am about to present the screen. And that means the technical wizardry.
It all worked. It worked just how it was supposed to.
We're good? We're good? All right. I picked a terribly illegible black letter font here for all of our headlines, but we're just going to enjoy it because RPG layout is a terrible ritual. It is fearsome. It is daunting. We all do it wrong and summon terrible demons to Earth. And yeah, let's summon some better demons to Earth, I guess, as we do this.
I'm also very excited for whoever's watching on their cell phone right now, and that means it's not only the normal size, it's truncated down to cell phone size, and then it's only a portion of the screen. It's that. Well, speaking of which, would you be willing to make this available, the presentation available afterwards in the... Yeah, so in the Discord, we'll have it available in the layout section after the fact for people who want to poke through it.
I will say it makes a lot less sense without my beautiful dulcet tones coming across and saying everything softly into your ear. But
they can, you know what? We go straight to YouTube, so they can just replay. Speaking of YouTube, Lone Archivist watching over there. Lone, great to have you with us.
Oh, one of my faves. Well, let's do an introduction of the audience here. So this presentation is sort of geared towards people who are intimidated, horrified, terrified, or feel like they're starting to get the hang of layout or understand the basic concepts and want to take the next step in what they're doing. I think one of the uses of this presentation is even if you don't take anything away from this that you are actively doing, especially as like an RPG writer, a writer of any kind, really, the goal here is to kind of explain the principles and then a little bit of the practicalities with each of these areas. And so hopefully you walk away, and even if you never touch layout design software, you understand what's going into the work to do layout design. You have a better recognition of what's good, how to talk to any layout artists that you hire for a project, that you work with for a project, et cetera, et cetera. So don't be horrified. You will become less horrified, hopefully, and more competent at all of this as we go through. So why are you listening to me, though? That's a good question. We talked about it a little bit already. I am, my professional background is in UX content. It's often called UX writing, content design, a little bit of information architecture. I call this because it's the simple way to just grab all of those different things. And the way that we refer to that often is that we're designing through language. I'm not a visual designer by trade. It's something that I do for fun. I've always laid out publications, that type of thing. But for the most part, like my expertise is in words, and really finding the right time and the place for particular words, thinking about meaning, structure, organization. And that's made layout design really interesting to me because it's less about there's some people who are amazing artists when it comes to layout art. I'm not. I'm very much a structuralist, and that's coming from the sort of like words background of what I do. One of the notes I gave this, UX content, UX writing, all of that type of thing is a hotly in-demand field. And I think people who are dealing with RPGs, the way your brains think about these kind of things is really conducive to this type of environment. If it's ever something that you think about, that you're wondering about professionally, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to chat with you a little bit about what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. But the stuff that we're here for is the fun stuff, and that is games. I've been doing this RPG stuff. As I mentioned, I've been writing for a number of different titles, Trophy, Public Access, one of the Gauntlet games, the upcoming Silt versus RPG. I have a scenario in that. I think there's couple of things that Tony and I are working on behind the scenes as well. Butter Princess just came out. You can see it on my shelf over there. I think a beautiful game. IGDN thought so as well and gave us a Best Graphic Design Award this summer. Sunken also was a nominee for Best Art a couple of years ago, and then I'm working on this Planet Raygun game. You're going to get to see a little like taste of some of the layout of a lot of these different projects that I'm working on. So even if you hate the idea of layout design, stick around and you'll see some little previews of things that are coming your way to the gaming table. But let's dig into it now. The goal in layout design is really not to create some kind of like beautiful artifact. I mean, that's great. We should do that. But the big thing that we're doing is trying to enhance the usability of our writing. So instead of just blocks and pages of text, we are trying to emphasize certain points, allow people to navigate, especially within RPGs, right? These are books that people are meant to read as well as play. And so being able to let people very quickly navigate through these big documents, right? Like sometimes 400 plus pages is really key. And that's where layout design comes through. As I said, I'm not a layout artist by trade. So what is my approach? I'm just going to go over these pretty quickly. These are what I consider my principles as I'm approaching a project. And I think these are things that you can jot down. I'm going to read them all. I know they're probably very tiny on your screen. In this particular case, this was on a giant screen the last time that I presented it. So it's perfect size, but it's a little small on the computer screen. I'm going to read it anyway. Write for design is the big thing. So thinking about when we're writing, how is that going to fit in design? A big thing for me in the UX realm is what we call parallel structure. And that means just making sure that everything's about, if we have a bulleted list, right? Like all those bullets are about the same length. They are constructed the same way, same sizing of words, that type of thing. Be thinking about how all of this is going to fit on the page. And that's what gets to the second principle of consider your plan. So even as you're writing, even as you are starting a design project, you'll play around with things, but you want to think about what's that long-term plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that comes into, a lot more about how that comes into form over time. One of the really big things, I think you can do anything that you want as far as layout design is concerned. The key is choosing with intent. Don't just do something because you feel like it's the right thing to do because some person in a presentation like this told you that it's a good way to do it. I have very strong feelings about margins, which you will hear. And that's completely fine to break is the other thing that I'm doing, but don't do it just out of the blue. Do it because it means something for what you're doing, that it is going to evoke what you want to evoke. It's going to improve the usability in a way, the experience of the text in a way that's really important. Speaking of margins, let it breathe. A lot of times, and this is kind of an older principle, was like we need to cram as much as possible onto a page because ink is expensive, paper is expensive. It's really not at this point. let things breathe. Give people space to sort of navigate the page, appreciate what you've written, to understand the hierarchy of the text, all of that. Don't feel like you have to like overcram information into a particular page. Final principle, the most important one, and the one that is written big at the appropriate size, is steal good ideas.
I'd zoomed in.
One of the cool things about layout design is that everything that you need to know is out there. You don't have to know, let me say it this way, you don't need to know a lot about what you're doing if you've got a ruler in your hand. You can go to any book, any document, and pull out that ruler and measure and see exactly what they're doing, especially when you're looking at work that's by an expert, and especially like a structuralist layout designer. You're going to see very quickly, oh, here's how they have their columns arranged. Here's the length of the margins. Here's the size of these particular fonts. All of that is very, very accessible to you with this thing that was invented. I don't even know when rulers are invented. I should probably look it up because it would be a fun fact, but you all have Google. You can figure that out. Like I said, every publication shows you exactly how it's made. What you see here is 3 images. The one on the left here is a magazine that I looked at, and I was like, I love the design of that. It fits my principles. It's huge margins, very breathable text. I love the way it is. The thing in the middle is as I'm experimenting. So the page on the left in that middle image is actually like a layout test that I did in trying to mimic what that publication was doing, and for my own purposes. And what you see on the right is the actual layout of the magazine. So I'm kind of like flipping through, I'm looking to see how it compares, if I've got the system right, that type of thing. And what you see on the right there is the final product. And this is my weird Western game that I've been working on for years, and kind of how it's forming as far as the layout design is concerned. And you can see that there are a lot of differences between how the left and the right are laid out. I think thinking about how your work is going to be transformed, or how you're transforming the layout design of what you're stealing, is really important. Don't just pull something verbatim, but think about like, what are the tweaks that I need for what I'm doing? Which gets to this point, which is to fit your content, not your field. There are some immensely talented RPG layout artists and designers out there. I don't want to take anything away from them. Historically, this has not been a very well developed layout design field. And partly is it's coming from zine culture, right? Like there's that whole idea of like, we just need to cram a lot of information onto the page, so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily the best plan for us to, as we're coming up with a plan for how we're going to lay out a document, to look at what's been done. There's great examples, don't get me wrong. Like I can give you, dozens at this point of folks and books that are worth looking at, and you can see lots of them on my shelves behind me. But there are other publications and types of publications that we can look at to get inspiration and bring something new into what we're doing, and something that people will look at and say, well, I've never seen that before, or that's really smart, really clever. I love sort of like artsy literary magazines, and this is a magazine, I think this is called F, and it's a food magazine. You can see some odd examples here. I'll flip through kind of quickly. You can see odd column structures, ways to do things. I really think that cookbooks are an amazing resource to be looking at, because they are similar to what we said about RPGs, 5 minutes ago. They are meant to be read as well as used functionally at a table, in this case, a counter, right? And so there's a lot that these books are trying to do that's very similar to what we're trying to do when we're laying out a role-playing game, where we want very evocative text that really brings it to life and gives us a taste of gives us all of these senses of what it would be like to be in this space. But we also need very skimmable text. We need very scannable text. We need core elements to be communicated. So I love just go to the cookbook section of your local bookstore and look through things and pick through things and be thinking about, could be any book, right? Any type of book. think about what you're trying to lay out and how the things that you are looking at a bookstore, on the magazine shelf, wherever the case, might help. It might show you ways to present that information really cleanly. I also think it's worth, if you get promotional magazines from different, I think this is Patagonia that you see, it's worth opening those up and flipping through those, because there's a lot of really cool designers in advertising and marketing. Clayton Notestein is one of them. And yeah. So all of this comes to you're stealing these ideas, you're looking through all these books, and the core of what we're doing really is planning for the future. It's easy to just hop into layout software and start doing things and say, okay, it looks nice, and just kind of fumble our way through our layout design with some basic ideas. As I've said it a couple times, I'm very much a structuralist. I like to think about design systems, content systems, like what are the rules that are governing what we're doing. I think it makes it a lot easier as the project gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Because we start out, we're just laying out one page, but that's going to be 400 pages. That's going to be 100 pages. It might be 40 pages, but that's 40 times the length of what we're dealing with initially. So planning a little bit for the future is useful. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about here. As far as tools, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about as we get into the details here is going to be applicable across a lot of different software applications. Even I will test font pairings in Google Docs and start playing around with like, okay, what's the right combination of this? What are the color palettes for texts and that type of thing? I think a really accessible tool for people who are getting into layout design to start is Affinity Publisher. It's pretty affordable. If you go to their site and you feel like it's too expensive right now, it might be on sale right now. It's often on sale. That's my point. And so it's worth checking it out. I think $70 is the base price for just this piece of software. There's a Photoshop type software. There is a vector illustration software, as well as a raster based image editing software, and the three combine in really nice ways. So you can do a lot of this stuff. It's very sophisticated. It has a lot of the power of what InDesign would, which is the Adobe version of a layout tool, but at a much it's a much easier way to get into it.
For what you could pay for 2 months of Adobe, you could get all of the affinities forever.
Yes. There are reasons where as you get more into it, you may want to like sign up for that subscription with Adobe. I actually use a little bit of everything in the work that I do. But this is like, it's going to do pretty much everything you need to do, and you can work around anything, especially if you are just doing the work for yourself and for your direct audience. So the way that I'm going to kind of go through this is I'm going to talk about higher level principles just as we have, and then we're going to get nitty gritty for a little bit, and then we're going to swing back, talk about the higher level principle. It all sort of starts with what's called the grid. And this is sort of our plan for the future. This is essentially the reference point for how we're going to place all of our content. The grid is built up of a few different elements, and we're going to talk about what those elements are. The first one and the most important one, the one that I call the most sacred of all spaces, are your margins. It's very simply like that box that's determining where the content is going and then where the content is not going. The purposes of this, I think from a sort of a usability standpoint, part of it is that we just want this space that like if something goes wrong in printing historically, you've got a margin of error, right? But this also determines the max noise level of a page. And it allows the reader to handle the page. So a margin is where I can grab the text or grab the publication without having my fingers, my thumbs over the text that I'm going to be reading. I love big margins. I think that margins can never be too big, really. So be adventurous with this. Don't feel like you have to cram in a lot. The important thing is to treat that margin space, once you've set it, like that's a sacred space. Nothing should go in there. And you can kind of see in this, or hopefully you can see that even in the illustrations in Brindlewood Bay is the example on the right here. The illustration is focused within that margin space as well. Like the content that you need that is most important is all within that margin box. And that's true for the text pages as well. Another quick aside that I wanted to make here is that we're going to talk about like, there's a lot of like very technical advanced ways to do things. And like some of what we're going to set up is going to allow us to do really complicated things. Simple is also fine. Simple that's done well is extraordinary. And Brindlewood Bay, I think, is a really good example of this, that it's one column, just beautiful sacred margins here. It's very simple in how it's structured and laid out, and does everything that we want it to do and everything that we need it to do for how the text is designed and written. So a couple little tips here to just kind of rifle through them. Like I said, large outer margins allow more handhold space. They also allow people to take notes, which is especially helpful in a physical document. You usually want the bottom to be the largest because that's where your page numbers go. And otherwise, keep the margins free of text. You're going to be tempted at times to say like, oh, I could fit 2 more lines of this paragraph if I just swung this margin or swung out of the margin a little bit. Just stick to your margins. That's what they're there for. You can always edit your text. I'm a writer. I think it's better to hit the text than to creep over the margins. That said, wayfinding is okay. You saw that in that example from Brindlewood Bay. We've got a heading that kind of creeps a little bit of the margin, and page numbers historically can sit below the margin as well. But yeah, don't be afraid of large margins. Do it. Large margins sent you. That's my new slogan for all of the Pee-wee's Big Adventure fans.
That's great. We got a lot of people who have joined recently. If you are going to be looking for a closer view of this later, we'll post the entire presentation in the layout section of the +1 Discord. That's ttrpg.link/Discord. Also, everybody who's watching over on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, or apparently Tumblr. Apparently, if you link, if you put a link in Tumblr for a stream, somebody can engage in the chat via Tumblr. So Jay, champion of wide margins and Wanderhome Dragon, is over on Tumblr right now engaging in the chat. It's very, very fun. We're all very excited. But if you want to see this later, feel free to hop over to our Discord, check out the community guidelines. If it seems like a place you want to hang out, grab the design junkies role, and you'll be able to access the presentation after the fact also.
Cool. This next very simple piece of the grid is what's called the baseline grid. One other side note is I'm going to be using the terminology throughout this that is tied to Affinity Publisher, so that if you are using that tool and trying to get into things, these terms, I don't feel like you need to memorize all of these terms. It's more about just becoming, I think what we're doing here is just to become more familiar with the terms and how the things work, so that as you start looking at other documentations, other references, resources, so on and so forth, you'll say, oh yeah, I remember that. I have some familiarity with that. I understand the basic concept of it. But all the terminology that I'm using is going to be tied to Affinity Publisher for this. Baseline grid. This is another one that I think is really useful and really underrated in how useful it is. Essentially what it is it's a grid that's the baselines for all of your text. So all of your text is going to line up against, you can see in this image, there are these like little gold lines that are hidden, that are sitting there. And no matter what size the font is, no matter where it is on the page, like it is all lining up to those baselines. And that allows us that as we start, as we go beyond that first page, we know that everything is lined up. Everything is like, I can scan, I can scan the spread of the book, and it's all very fluid, very easy. It looks really nice, tight, and clean as well. So this is from, this particular image is from Into the Odd. Yeah, like Yuan Nor is the layout designer here, and he does some really complicated work. Also did Morkborg, right? And they're very adventurous. There's a lot going on, but it is tied, at least into the odd, is tied to a baseline grid.
Well, and one of the things Johan has talked about a lot is there are pages that are laid out for art's sake, but when you get to the core text that is needed to play the game, it all goes back to being very direct, very regimented, very clean, like text. And especially if you get like Into the Odd, or if you get the bare bones edition over at the Cartelian Vaults, or for free on their itch page, it certainly does. But any of the extended text sections still follow the grid and baselines and everything else as part of that process.
Yeah. So we're going to go into dark mode here for a second and talk about how you set up a baseline grid. Pretty easy. There's a baseline grid setting within Affinity Publisher. You will just go in there. You generally want to set this for whatever you decide is going to be your main body text size. You typically just want your baseline grid to be at that size or larger. A cool little tip though, if you want some flexibility, like you're going to have your main body text and you want smaller text, can be a little bit problematic. You can essentially like have that amount. So instead of using 12, I can use 6, and then everything is I still have baselines at the 12 points. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this most efficiently. But if I have a smaller type than that, if I'm using an 8-point, that type of thing, the spacing is going to be a little bit cleaner and tidier as you do that. Pretty easy to set, and then it just appears, and you will, within your text setting, say that you want the text to snap to the baseline grid. And then as you drag things around and move things, it'll just always make sure that it's consistent and even across all of your pages. Very useful.
Lone has a question.
Yeah.
Any recommendation on using tables and the baseline grid? Should everything always match, or is it okay to break the grid when using tables?
I am one to, I think it's something that with your particular project, look at it, see how it works. I'm one that if I'm setting it, I am setting it and I'm sticking with it. I'm going to figure out how to do it within tables. And generally this is where what I found is that let it breathe principle becomes really helpful, right? If I am trying to cram in a lot of information, I'm setting my table as a box, and then I'm trying to fit text inside of that, where, especially with a baseline grid system, you can, the table itself, the boxes, that particular form of grid is going to expand off of the text as opposed to create further constraints for the text. I hope that explanation makes some sense. That the more space that you give around, the more space that you have to work with, essentially. So you're not going to have those, if you're starting with the box and then fitting stuff in there, yes, there's going to be weird oddities in how things lay out within that. But if you're setting the text up and then building the table around it, that's maybe not the best explanation of it, but hopefully it makes some sense.
What I got was just play around with it and figure it out.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
The more that you can stick to the grid, the better. Like if you're saying that you're going to commit to it. And yeah, like, I guess I'm repeating myself here a little bit in saying that if I take that principle of like letting things breathe, if I'm going to have a table, maybe I just do a page that's a table. And if there's some extra space on the page, that's fine. But a lot depends on your particular approach. Yeah, for your particular project. Columns. So columns are kind of like essentially the vertical version of a baseline. In the same way that a baseline might be the foundation if we're thinking about a Parthenon or whatever the case is, and then we've got columns that are reaching up out of it. And these are the lanes that we're going to line text up with. They establish that consistency for both how text and image fill the space. Yeah, Pretty simple concept, I think, here. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to say on columns. But you can see here on the right is an image from the developing layout for Planet Raygun. And I've got a lot of columns in here. I've got 9 total columns, and then there are gutters in between the columns. And that's determining, I have an odd number here because I always want an emphasis section of text, even when I'm using multiple columns, and then a supporting section or a supporting column. So I can use, the reason that I add more here is that it's more flexible. I can change things around from page to page and spread to spread, but it's still on this grid. So as you're looking at as I'm looking at this entire thing and pulling the entire project together, there's a consistency that's uniting it all. And making it sets up some expectations for the user of how text is working on the page, how it's not. I think I don't have the diagram of that in here, so I'm not going to go into that. But we'll see some other examples where it's even columns versus odd columns.
But you're also saying there's no problem varying where your columns hit on those vertical or on this. There's no problem with where your text columns hit on those lines, as long as you are consistently using those lines from page to page and using the same margins across the board, right? So if you decide all of a sudden, oh, I really want this first one to be much broader and I don't need as much space for the right-hand column, you could move that over a little bit, keeping that same kind of gutter space in between, but changing the feel of the page within those same formats.
Exactly. And you can kind of see that on this page, right? There's this, what I call the hype text right underneath the heading, where that goes across the entire page. So it's effectively working as one column there, right? It is in the scheme of this design, it is 9 columns wide, but it's really, we see it as one column. And then below it, we've got a 5 and we've got a 4. And yeah, the choice on odd here is, like I said, just to make sure that there's always, however I decide to split up that page, there's an emphasis column of text that's made with an odd number of columns.
And you like to get into the odd, like that's the other.
Yeah. So as far as doing this within Affinity Publisher, it's in the guide section, what's called the guide section. Margins and columns are both in there. So that makes it really easy. Again, like we looked at with Brindlewood Bay, 1 column is perfectly fine. Don't feel like you need to have 9 columns or odd numbers of columns and that type of thing. A single column is perfectly fine. Don't feel like you're doing anything wrong or, unsophisticated if you do that. There's a lot of beautiful layouts that are done with 1 column. More columns just allows more intricate placement. So if I'm doing more collages with images, I've got complex tables to go back to that. All of that type of thing, more columns is going to make that easier. In this particular case, when we're talking about gutters often refer to as well as the space in the center of a spread. But in this case, we are talking about the space in between each of those individual columns. And you want those to be, this is a little technical and we're gonna get more into it in a little bit, but about 1-to-1 or larger than your leading. Leading is the horizontal space. So essentially, like we go back to that idea of a grid. We essentially want everything to be working on this same functional grid. So leading is going to be determined by our type size, and leading is establishing our gutter width, and then our gutter width is helping form our columns, and so on and so forth. So it kind of all explodes out. Let's dig into, that's sort of how the page layout is done, how our art and our text are going to interact. We're going to dig into type itself, how your words get laid out. This is for all the fonts and font family and type freaks out there. And we'll start with fonts. The big thing here is, obviously we all look, and this was the discussion about the Runcible font that was used in the promotion for this presentation. There's a lot of cool fonts out there that were just like, oh, I need a reason to use that. I need to come up with some reason to use that. I think, again, like going to that principle of like choosing with intent, we want to make sure that whatever we're choosing has a purpose. And that's really the most important thing with fonts. Don't just pick a bunch of fonts because they are cool, pretty, however we want to term it. We want to think about what we're trying to communicate and how the font communicates that. We see, oh my gosh, I always do this because I do into the odd and then it's Tales from the Loop, right? I get the two mixed up whenever I do this presentation. And we can see this page on the right here, and there are a lot of, there's a couple fonts. We'll kind of break up what's going down there in a second as we go into dark mode. But we can kind of see as we just like glance at it, that there's ways that the fonts on this page are functioning. We see this big sans serif font, and sans serif is just that there's not those kind of like little curvatures, little embellishments on the edges of the letters. And they are giving us a really strong title. The text down below the age of the loop there is a serif font. It's in italics. It is also very evocative text. So there's a choice of what that is communicating for us. As well as then we have a sans serif again in that left column where it's the index. So it's very functional text. So it's taking that cleaner sans serif font. So everything here is serving a purpose, and the choices are serving a purpose. They all work together in one system and are spread across this, again, like it's consistent across this entire project. As far as font choices are concerned, the general standards are limit yourself to 2 to 3. I'm of an old school where it's pretty locked in on 2. Contrast is really the key here. You can see in these examples on the right, these are a couple setups for a headline, sort of a subheading, and then body text. We really want a big difference between the different ones, so that again, if it's about communicating something, that we can see that these different uses of fonts are communicating something different. They can be the same, from the same typeface, part of the same font family. In the lower example there, you see it's Libre Baskerville across the entire thing.
Oh, hey Mike, you accidentally got muted.
Oh.
Is the secrets. Go back to 2 to 3 fonts.
2 to 3 fonts is
you love 2 because you're old school.
Exactly. But you have seen, obviously, we go back to that choose with intent principle. You look at something like Morkborg, where Yuan did just a ton. There's what, like 200 fonts or something like that within that book. That's really complicated. It's a pretty precise system still. But anyway, 2 to 3, generally the easiest way to do it. That's what the old school people will always tell you. I think, yeah, even the people who are doing big dozen plus font books would also tell you that stick with 2 to 3 in general. The big key here, to repeat that point, is contrast. Make sure that each of these things are meant to communicate something different. Maybe a nuanced difference, but there is a difference. And so think about how much contrast you need to have between these things in order for them to effectively communicate. When you're starting body font, you typically want to choose that for legibility, right? Like that's the most text that I'm going to be reading as your reader, as your user. And it's really important to have that be legible. I talked earlier about the font that I'm using for headlines here is a black letter. It's very fancy. It's very evocative of a particular period and a particular style and a particular aesthetic. It's not a very legible. It's not very readable. If I were to do all of the body text in that font, it makes it very difficult for the reader. And so, yeah, easy one, body font, legibility. Generally, the most popular combination is what you see in this top example here, and that's a serif plus a sans serif. So a serif being that sort of like older, more elegant with the serifs, those kind of embellishments on the text, and then the sans serif is this very like clean, modern look to it without those little frills and that type of thing. The reason for that is that's a really accepted common contrast between the typefaces. So it's very easy to pair those and find a set that matches in a nice way and creates those distinct communications. But that said, like I said right off the bat here, multiple fonts in the same typeface often work well. So you see in that lower example, we have Libre Baskerville is both for the heading, the subheading, and the body text. It is there. I believe that these are different. Yes, so these are different fonts in the same typeface. The typeface here is Libre Baskerville, and we have a bold, which is one of the fonts. We have a, oh my gosh, it's an all upper caps version of, it's even too small for me. There's some technical spacing here, is how they're establishing this. A lot of times you'll see it labeled as like book or bold, and then a regular or light is down below.
Immediate font question.
Yeah.
Is it true that serif fonts are better for body text? I've heard people warn against using sans serif fonts for body text.
A lot of it depends on the specific font is what you get into. I think it's generally, I mean, you can see in this example above, like the serif font is, I think, more common. I don't know, it varies a lot in this era. I would say that traditionally it's more common as the body font, but a sans serif can be just as readable, if not more readable in certain cases. But a lot varies. There's going to be serif fonts that are very tough to read over the course of hundreds of characters and hundreds of words. And there's going to be sans serifs that are the same way. So a lot of it, I mean, one of the things that I would underscore is there's all of these rules that are sort of like recommended as best practices, and they're not particularly consistent. A lot of it is just sort of like looking at what you have and determining what works best, what looks best. Again, that's sort of like choosing with intent is sort of the principle that I would keep going back to on this.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in / relationship between a typeface and a font?
It's all taxonomy. Typeface is essentially the highest level in what you're going to be dealing with on a regular basis. So it is, a typeface is made up of font families and then fonts, lots of different fonts. And those fonts are sort of like special variations of the typeface. So I think what you can see here, so the Libre Baskerville in bold here would be a font. The Libre Baskerville below it in, like there's this variation that I don't know what the variation is. It's probably like book or something like that, in all caps, like that's a font. And then the sort of like regular version of that is another font. So in your selection screen, you will often pick the particular typeface. And then the font, the specific font is the combination of the style of
And typefaces can be used. Typefaces can also be used to refer to like broader classifications. Like you could talk about serif typefaces, right? Which would be all typefaces that have a serif function to them. But that might be different families of fonts, and each of those families of fonts are going to break down to individual fonts.
Yes, it is. It's also, for what it's worth, it's one of these things that it's, even the softwares use terms in different ways from tool to tool and how they're classifying things. So it's not super important. They're basically synonymous for like everyday use for what it's worth. But yeah, technically, Typeface is a big group of fonts that are similarly styled and probably all share the same name.
Signal Station says, if you were a font, your family's surname would be a typeface, which is not a bad way to go about it.
Yeah.
Also, anybody who makes fun of you for using them interchangeably or in their mind incorrectly isn't somebody you want to work with in the future. Just keep that in mind.
And most people who do this are really chill about it. And that's partly why, like, as I'm thinking through this, I'm like, oh, but that's technically not right. And like, there's a tangle here if I explain it this way. But it's not anything to get like too stressed out about. Certainly not going to affect the quality of the work that you put out. Let's continue to styles. Speaking of the taxonomy and ontology of fonts and type and all of that. So styles are particular treatments of fonts, of text that you're using for specific purposes. And these are essentially going to like enhance the navigation for the eyes. We can distinguish more granular functions, and by setting styles, we allow ourselves to do much more complex work pretty quickly. So we've got a spread by Mamatos over here that has a lot of different styles. And this book, and the name is escaping me here, Arc, is very complex as far as the layouts are all very artfully done, and there's a lot of styles going on. You can see, like, one of the things that your eye, I'm assuming everyone can catch here, is that spells and techniques within this body text looks very different than the rest of the body text, right? And then there's this heading where we have got a specific treatment as well. As we talked about earlier when we were looking at the Tales from the Loop spread, we've got this sort of in-game quotation, in-world quotation here that's its own style. But yeah, certain words throughout are called out in this other style. So when we want to start, so this is as we build out our system, as we build out our plan, we'll make decisions, right? We'll say, okay, I'm doing this for my body text. I'm using this for my heading text. And then this is where, for those of you who are familiar with Microsoft Word, Google Docs, that type of thing, or even just HTML, you've got heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. Those are some like basic styles, right? So we apply, there's a particular font that we're using. There might be a color that we're using, a particular size that we're using, and all of that is encompassing a particular style. So we set up these styles and we have them for certain purposes, and that's where we start with body text, right? Body text is a very specific purpose. It has a very specific style. Our heading text, very specific purpose, very specific style, and we can get more and more advanced as we go out. So we've got, for instance, in this spread, we've got body text that has like particular feature calls out. So we might call that like body feature text as a style. And we set this up within our software, and we can just like you would in Microsoft Word and Google Docs, whatever the case, we can just highlight that text, we can flip the style, and we have all of those different applications, the color, the size, the boldness, the font itself, all of those kind of things will change automatically for us. And if we decide that we need to change that in the future, if we decide, you know what, I don't like that I made all of these things big, bold, blocky, sans serif font amidst my serif, I thought it was going to look great, I don't like it now, we can just go back and we can change that style, and everything that's been assigned with that style will change with it. So again, like everything's pretty easy with 1 page, 2 pages, we can just do it on the fly. But as we start looking at these bigger books and more complex layouts, that's where something like this becomes useful and really important. So let's flip in a dark mode here. You can create the style itself in design by just changing all of the settings. And then what you do within Affinity Publisher is you're just going to save it with, there's a paragraph tab, and you're going to save it with a new style. and then you can name that whatever you want. I usually name it after whatever that function is. Sometimes you might just code it for how it looks as well. There are character styles are a subset for text within a paragraph. So there's paragraph styles and there's character styles. Paragraph style is going to change the entire paragraph. A character style is just going to change the particular characters that you have selected. So if we flip back up to light mode here in the spread from arc, spells and techniques are set up as character styles. And so when those were created, they were highlighted. There was a specific character style applied to those words. The rest of the body text or the paragraph style remains the same. Generally, like I said, like those kind of common Microsoft Word, Google Docs type of styles are the ones that you kind of want to set up and be thinking about initially in your project. So I would say heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, body, and then bullets get a little bit more complicated in setting them up, but generally you're using bullets and you're going to have captions on images. And then with a lot of RPGs, we've got flavor text, right? There's that sort of like in-world text, or we've got like a paragraph that's sort of fiction or a essay or a poem from some character. And it can be helpful to set up a unique style for that. And yeah, once you've got that, then it becomes pretty easy because you lay out the text and you're just going to select whatever the style is for that particular text. And it changes to that. You can change it in the future, whatever you want to do. It becomes super, super easy. You don't have to remember like, oh, was that an 11 point in this shade of magenta or 13 point in bold with this other shade of magenta. You just select the style for what it is and keep on rolling. Final thing on text here, pretty easy one here, is alignment. Generally, you're doing left alignment. The alignment is essentially guides the eyes while polishing the look. It's very simple on its onset at the outset, right? Like we're picking between left align, center, right, or justified, and for the most part, just rule out right aligned. And center is generally frowned upon in design circles, but there's certainly places for it, right? As a subheading, you've seen a lot of centered text in the examples that you've seen as well. And you see it in my example from Sunken here. In fact, like those headings, the sort of like flavorful heading for the page, as well as the functional heading for the page are both centered text. But then everything else here is actually justified. The choice between left align and justified is the difficult choice. I think that justified always looks cleaner. So another little word to just drop into your vocabulary here is what's called rag. And rag is what happens with left alignment when you've got, especially if you're using really long words, you'll have some lines that end right at the end of a column, and you'll have other lines of text end, I don't know, sometimes even halfway in that like text column. And the rag is the sort of the edge of that and how it gets rough, the sort of spikiness of it. And so the nice thing about justified text is that you have these very clean edges. The text looks like a block. It has a very like visually clean, sophisticated look. It becomes really technically challenging to work with justified text. Even you can see here in a couple lines, maybe you can peek it. It is small here. The justified text, because it's trying to fit a line, trying to fit all of this text across a set line, it's going to space the letters differently and it's going to space the words differently. So you can end up getting, I'm sure if you've played with justified text, you end up having that one word on a line and it'll be like 5 letters and each letter is evenly spaced across this entire line that has maybe 80 characters in the line above it, or 30, 40, whatever the case is. And you've got 5 characters taking the entire width below. All of this is avoidable with certain settings. The warning that I'm going to give you, I love justified text. I do it whenever I can make it work with a particular font. in a particular software, it's great, love it, do it. Affinity Publisher is very bad with it. So this is one of the reasons where if you really, really wanted to do a book or a document with justified text, because the edges on those grids are really important to the story that you're telling, for some reason, that's kind of how I felt with Sunken. You will, or you just want to use really big words and not have a lot of rag, whatever the case is, you may need to look into like a couple months of Adobe InDesign or just biting that bullet to do it. Even with left align, that said, when you go into, you can adjust all of these settings of how the alignment works. This is specifically really important for justified text. So be sure to turn on auto hyphenation is the thing that I would say. The defaults in every software, whether it's InDesign or Affinity Publisher, are bad. You can, I've got some numbers here that you can look at and copy these down. I'll read them out for you too, that are a good sort of like professional median that works for a lot of different fonts, a good starting place. But where was I going with that? You will need to tweak this stuff. You can Google and just say like, what are some good like justified paragraph justification settings? And there's some great articles that break it down in detail for you. So what I would say, just to read off the numbers here for you, for word spacing on justification, minimum 75%, desired 85%, maximum 110%. So that is saying like, we don't want the spacing to shift over or under these amounts as the software is automatically doing the typesetting. And we want to aim for this sort of like this particular area. And then with letter spacing, we want that to be a lot smaller shift. So in this case, the minimum of -2, desired of 0, and a maximum of 4%. The one other thing that I kind of tie into alignment here is what's called leading. Leading is the space in between the lines, so that vertical space in between the lines. A lot of times you may be tempted to just say like, oh, I can cram an extra couple paragraphs in here if I decrease this leading, if I make the lines tighter together. We generally want enough space though, because it can get tough if we have very tight leading. It becomes very difficult for the reader to shift from line to line. The same thing can happen if we make it too big. So there's not a really precise way. It's going to depend typeface to typeface, font to font here, what the actual setting is. You kind of eyeball it. I think there's a discussion within the Explorers Design group. If you're a part of that, Clayton Note Signs, very RPG design focused site and community, where they talked about, I think they built a template for checking leading on, you essentially make 24 different versions of it and you start comparing them side by side. And you are just eyeballing it and determining what looks best, but you're getting more and more precise as you go along. The big principle here, for what it's worth, is give it room to breathe, but not too much. Feels like an oversimplification, but it really kind of is that simple. Look at it and tighten it up a little bit, and you might say like, oh, there's not enough room to breathe there. Let me expand that. You'll be able to get a good read of it if you're looking at it and judging that particular element on its own. Cool. That's all that I've got on text. We're in the final section here. Locking in your look with the color and spice. First thing is palette, color. This palette is just about color. Again, this is all about guiding the eyes in some ways. So you've seen there's different colors applied to different typefaces throughout. By determining what that color story is for the text. Again, it's about creating that consistency, giving you another tool for creating distinction, creating contrast, and what you're communicating in each element of your layout design. I am going to give you my super secret, not so secret anymore tip. there's a site called Designspiration, a portmanteau of inspiration and design. Go there, you can plug in a color. There's a little palette in the search bar, and you can click on that palette and you can type in your little hex code, your 6-letter number code in there for a particular color. And it's going to give you a ton of images that use that color. And you can look through those and say, you know what, I like this palette, or I like the different combination of colors. You can click on that, and for each of those images, you can look at it. It sort of automatically pulls out like a palette of 5 colors from that. And then you can continue refining. So you can look at then that palette. The URL is always your 5 hex codes. So if you bookmark that, you've got the hex codes that you can just copy and paste out of your URL and into your design tool, or whatever you're using. You can share it around. If you have an artist that's working on a project that you hire, you can say, here's my design inspiration board for the palette. You can adjust those colors, and you can either do it within the software or just simply by changing that hex value within the URL. 5 colors is considered really versatile. You want to have a dark color, a light color, and some stuff in between. There is generally, especially for web stuff, you want to avoid pure bright white, and you want to avoid pure, essentially in RGB values, what is 000 or 255, 255, 255. We want to avoid that. Just a rule of thumb. It gets a little complicated when we start doing black and white printing and all of that type of thing. In those cases, you would, but when it comes to our color palette and what we're doing stylistically, as opposed to body text, that type of thing, avoid those extremes. The final tip on colors here is what's called swatches within your software. So this is true for pretty much any software that does design stuff. You set up swatches, so you just add those hexes. And again, similar to what we're talking about with styles, we can change those swatches, and then that color is always available. So I don't have to, every time I'm setting a color, copy and paste it out of a particular URL. Other stuff as far as completing the visual look of what you've done. One thing that I would note is art isn't necessarily necessary. If you've made really smart choices with all of these different design principles, with your type, with your colors, all of that, not having art on every page, or not even having that much art, can just emphasize how all of your smart decisions are working together and how amazing everything works. What you see on the right here is an upcoming game that Michael Van Vliet, Brian Sago, and me have been developing called The Wassailing of Kloss Manor, horror game set at Christmas time with some Bedlam Manor, trophy, all of that kind of stuff mixed in. And this spread is just text. There is no art here at all. You can do it. That said, Brian has made some amazing woodblock cuts, so we have added art into the book, and now I have a whole new design challenge on how to get all of that in there.
Just stick it in one of those margins. You got plenty of space.
Exactly. So that said, transitioning, you'd be surprised if you haven't reached out to artists, that type of thing, at how willing everyone is to, not everyone, but how willing people are to work with you. You're going to get some no's, people who are too busy, that type of thing. Yeah, support a friendly artist. If somebody can do stuff and bring your work to life, it establishes a signature visual for what you're doing. It adds some depth to the design. You could see in the previous spread, like, it does look pretty flat, and adding art adds that extra depth. This is Michael Van Vliet, works with rapid punches a lot, and you can see, like, there's just something about having a crab with a face in it and crab parts growing out of it that you just can't evoke with text alone. The other thing to do is public domain art. The big thing that I would say here is to own it with stylization. So don't just look at a piece of public art and say, okay, it kind of fits, and slap it in. There's a lot that you can do in owning it for yourself and for your particular book in how you adjust things. 2 ways to do that. We've got a couple pieces from a couple different books from Contijo here. We've got some collage work where you take multiple public domain images, kind of pull them together into something unique and new. Could do that if you're not an artist, don't want to get into the collage work and all of that type of thing. A lot can be done with just putting text or a shape or some line work or whatever the case is, simple design elements over a piece of art or incorporating art into text, all of that type of thing. It allows you to own the public domain art, make it feel unique, make it feel personal for your particular project. And then all of that pulled together, you've got, your end, the finale of your project, and the finale of this presentation.
If we've got more questions, drop them now. Lots of commentary on how thick those margins were. Ray asked a really banger question early on, and I have unfortunately since refreshed the frickin' feed and gone other places. But I believe, and Ray, feel free to hop in and restate or cut and paste back down into the chat. One of the questions was kind of balancing the accessibility of information for an RPG as a reference tool versus the readability of it as a text, right? From a layout, from like a UX UI standpoint, like how do you approach some of those things in conversation with the text when you're doing layout?
That's really interesting. That is something that I am exploring a lot with Planet Raygun. So the next game that I'm developing with the Gauntlet, and that is one where I talked earlier about looking at cookbooks. Cookbooks do that balance of like, there's going to be evocative text. We want this to be a very readable document, but then we can also flag certain elements that we know are going to be very important to be skimmable. Let me put it that way. So I should be able to scan a page and be able to tell what is the information that I need to dig in more in depth. And I should be able to read very quickly any information that I'm going to need on the fly to describe. If I am the keeper, the GM, the DM of a game, I don't want to be reading full paragraphs of text. I just want to be able to look and see like, okay, there's that note, there's that thing that reminds me. Or there are the wayfinding points as well that I should be able to see like, okay, this is where that information that I'm looking for is, here's where the characters are, here's the quote that I'm going to grab. So generally I'm thinking, because I'm also in digital content, product design, that type of thing. And so we think a lot about digital readers are scanners as opposed to readers. You tend to follow the visual hierarchy of a page rather than the linear hierarchy of a page. So that's really important. I think it goes back to the styles, the font choice, and where you're using them, how you're using color, all of that type of thing. Is you're trying to emphasize certain things. Certain things you want to have very accessible, very easy to skim, scan, and other things you just need somebody to read them and spend a little bit more time with them and think about them. And so you'll make that text, I don't want to say like less accessible, but it's going to, it's more focused on like that evocative experience.
But section, and going back to cookbooks, like I have only ever asked for one cookbook in my life. It is the Zahav cookbook, which is at one point was the like top restaurant in the country. It's usually on the top 50 list. It's here in Philly, but it's an Israeli family's restaurant, right? Like, and so like it is their family recipes. It's their cultural heritage, presented as cuisine for, folks who can manage to get a reservation at any given time. So they also have like quick service restaurants and other stuff that have their own identity. But the thing that captivated me about it originally was like, there are these huge, like 3 to 5 pages of here's just pictures and stories about our family. And here's now a section of recipes from those stories broken out, and each one's got a little bit more a little bit more about that recipe story, but the vast majority of it is, here is the information you need to make this recipe now, right? And so I think, you know, for me, it is, I think, a really, not something I ever would have thought about. And I think a lot of us, you know, if we've only ever gotten the weird cookbook that, like, you know, your local craft or school or church organization put out, that's just a whole bunch of recipes shoved in a book with no story. Like, if that's your experience of cookbook, then it's not necessarily
right
gonna hit you. If you've ever looked at a cookbook that's really trying to do some sort of narrative work, though, that's where I think you get a ton of that type of output. Nosferate Tight wants to know, do you start with layout, or do you typically get a text going and then move over to layout? Like, you know, are you somebody who is like, hey, I've got ideas for like a bunch of things put together and I want to start writing for it? Or usually like, hey, here's the text and we're going to let the layout flow out of that?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of a dialogue between the two. I don't, like, there's that idea of like writing in layout. I don't write in layout, but I think of that was one of those principles early on, right? That I'm writing for design or I'm writing for layout. So I will get an idea, I will start forming it. This kind of happened with Planet Raygun, where there's another, oh my, I'm not gonna go to the whole history, the whole development or the evolution of Planet Raygun, but there was very expressly some layout strategies that I was thinking of as I was writing. And so essentially what we just talked about, right? Like cookbooks, how can I make the text and how can I make this game sort of my text conducive to that layout strategy, that layout idea. So I started like sketching it up and writing out ideas and sort of saying like, okay, I think that this is going to be the right amount of space when I lay this out, that type of thing. And then I pull it into design and I start building out that design system and refining that and getting a better understanding of, as I scale out the text, what are the rules that I need to follow? And even now I'm at the stage where we're starting to bring on writers for Planet Raygun to write heist scenarios and that type of thing. And I need to be able to tell them like very specifically, like, I need you to write for this thing 2 to 3 sentences and it's going to be this many characters. It's maybe a little overly precise compared to a lot of RPGs, but what that's going to allow me to do is when I pull that into design, then in the future, like I know it's all going to work because I've tested it out a bit in the design already. So I essentially know what my system is going to be. I'm always like making a plan and slowly developing the plan out to make sure that the system is going to hold as I scale it up.
Yeah. To Logan over on Facebook, this video will be available on YouTube after the live. All of our videos go over to YouTube immediately. We multi-stream, so there are people watching over there right now, but it means about 20 minutes after any broadcast, you can check the video out over there after the fact. But no, 100%. Like, it is also like, I'm the kind of person who I will put maybe 3 to 4 pages of text together for the core of my game to get like a minimum playable version. And then I will kick it over to Johnny to do layout because we want to start that conversation as early as possible. And it does unfortunately mean relaying things out multiple times sometimes. But the reality is sometimes then I'll go and tell people like, I need 3 sentences here, and they'll give me 5 and think, oh, I've done a good thing and given you extra words. And I'm like, no, like I need this to be 3 right sentences to go in this space. Even when the words are really great, it causes you to start thinking about things differently. So, and I think when you look at, you know, Mothership or Merkborg or a lot of other systems where the layout and the text are doing a lot of conversation with each other in a very tight way, you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, it's just because it's hyper minimalist, or it's just because it's this. It's just, but a lot of times there's a layout conversation happening there as part of the process too, that I think is really important.
Yeah, something that cool, just to point out that Tony's working on a game for people that don't know this, but we had a conversation where Tony like pulled out a note card and essentially like sketched out a prototype of what he was thinking for the for me. And we talked through it from there, right? Like, so it doesn't necessarily like what layout is doesn't necessarily need to mean like I'm going into Affinity Publisher, I'm going into InDesign, I'm setting up all these measurements and that type of thing. It could be as simple as like, here's a thing that's about the size of what I want to do. Let's sketch it out to get an idea of like what the flow of the document is.
Yeah, and it's a triptych game, right? So like for a lot of people, just think about like a pamphlet, except for it opens like this, right, instead of like or whatever a pamphlet normally does. But even thinking about how information crosses from one side of the character sheet to the other side when it's folded, certain things like that, like baseline conversations, came into some of those pieces. And the only thing I can do in layout is composition, is pulling out a piece of paper and being like, I think the page should kind of look like this for these blocks of information. Then I hand it to a talented layout person and say, do it better than that, but here's my input. But that's a very real skill. If you're working with somebody else to do layout, or even for yourself, learning to thumbnail a thing to give yourself a quick idea about where you want those blocks of information is huge. We worked with Riley in our Discord server the other day, who was had a character sheet mostly done, and it was very good, especially for, you haven't sent this to a layout artist, but we basically spent a morning going back and forth on small little things, where different information was, how certain types of information should sit on the page, what should be grouped together, what shouldn't be. It ended up, we took it from like this is a really solid B, character sheet, like really great attempt, to like, hey, even before you've gotten to a layout artist, like the way this is now arranged and these blocks of information is really tight, really well done. We actually found some more space, but there's plenty of negative room for things to breathe a little bit, like that type of thing. But a lot of it was just through thinking about things in that kind of block compositional space. So a lot of really good space. I think this is maybe a troll question. What about editing directly into layout?
I do it more than I should. I think that at some point, so here's what my advice would be. You always set up a source of truth, and if you are moving that source of truth, you are moving that source of truth. So establish it, right? Like if you are, if you're going to do a draft in your document and it's going to be the source of truth for the initial phase, but then you're going to move to design, your design file, if that's the source of truth, that's the source of truth. So you can edit in it. That's fine. Do it. Go for it. But the thing that always catches everybody up, right, is that we have two sources of truth. So we are editing things in the Google document and we're editing things in the layout software, and those two things don't mesh then. I think it's perfectly fine to edit things in the layout software. There's a unique set of mishaps that will happen when you're doing that. But yeah, there's a point where the source of truth is shifting to the layout design, regardless of what it ideally would be. And that's, I think it's fine to just say, at this point, it's this. And at some point, I will copy paste everything out of the layout software back into a new Google document, and that will become the new source of truth.
Last chance for questions from anybody who's watching now. If you're watching later, feel free to type in questions you have. If I can't get you an answer, I'll tag Mike and have them come over. You talked about a lot of different projects you have coming up. What is the thing that you are most excited about that people can look forward to the soonest, or is it all kind of a race to when things get done right now?
So there's two things. I think they were both mentioned by name during the presentation. The first one is Planet Raygun, which is my sci-fi heist game for people who have played Brindlewood Bay or The Between, or curiously looked at it and maybe thought, like, I'm not sure if this is quite for me. Planet Raygun is taking the mechanic there and applying it into heists and sort of like adventure gaming as opposed to mystery gaming. So a whole new spin on it. It's really exciting. It's really fun. Every play group that I've played it with, and even some of the independent play tests, have had a blast with it. It's developing very quickly. It's really exciting. It's like nothing else that you've played, but like everything else that you've played at the same time. I think it's superb.
The best sales pitch ever. Totally unique and eminently familiar. Having only read it, not had a chance to play it yet, unfortunately. It is, it's everything I love about Carve from Brindlewood, but it's way leaner. I think it's easier to pick up and start playing a lot faster than other CFB games. Not because if somebody at the table knows what's happening, those games aren't hard to jump into either, but somebody has to know what's happening. And with Planet Raygun, it's a lot easier. It's a lot quicker for that person to know, okay, here's what we're doing within that. So I'm super excited about it.
So there's that, and then Tony and I had this conversation earlier in the summer. Every year, I have this holiday game, The Wassailing of Kloss Manor, that just gets more and more complicated, more and more elaborate, more and more complicated. It's another one that I run every year for my personal group, and we've run the same scenario essentially for the past 4 years, and it is amazing. It's incredible. Michael Van Vliet, who did a lot of the best trophy incursions, and Devil Aim For Me, Grave Robber Die, all those cool classic trophy things, just went in and revised all my scenarios and sort of like set up a even wilder Kloss Manor than I had imagined. You play servants for the Kloss family as they are all spiraling out of control. It's a lot of fun. The art is beautiful. The layout design, you saw a little bit of it, I think is gorgeous as well. And that will hopefully be around in some form within the next couple months. So yeah.
Sweet. I'm excited about it. Also, speaking of Michael Van Vliet, everybody should go over and check out rpgzine.club. RPG Zine Club is a program that's launching. Hard launch is on October 3rd. It's a Tuesday. But if you are at Big Bad Con, we will be doing a soft launch there on October 1st. Also, if you go to the website on October 1st, I can't stop you from signing up. So, it's whatever. But we're going to be pushing things out the 3rd. This is a big thing for us. We just got full control of Plus One EXP back. We had tried to merge into a larger company. It just wasn't a good fit for a lot of reasons. They generously fully returned the companies to us, and that's transition happens on the 1st. So that is when we are fully launching out into the world. This is a great way for us to invest more intentionally in the creative community. If you like streams like this, if you like the actual plays that we do, the other content, as well as want to invest more intentionally in emerging creative voices from around the globe, sign up for RPG Zine Club to get different zines delivered straight to your house every single month from emerging and expanding creators from around the globe. Would love to have you be a part of this, both supporting us as well as supporting those creators. It's basically an equal split between the cost to print and operate those things, the profit share that we get, and the profit share that creator goes. And we want to give you as much direct access to those creators as they're comfortable with, so that you can start following their work and discover your new favorite game and your new favorite creator. But Grave Robber Die will be getting its physical release through Zine Club. It'll be our November, which really at this point is like you'll get it in early December release for Zine Club. We're very, very excited about that and working with Michael on a couple other things for that as well. So rpgzine.club is the place to go to sign up for getting an email when all that goes live. So please go check that out. Mike, if people want to follow your work, what's the best place for them to look?
Oh my gosh. I'm starting to mess around with Blue Sky, so you can find me there at Clearkeep. That said, clearkeep.us is my site. That's Clearkeep is my sort of publishing imprint or whatever you want to call it. And if you want to pick up a physical copy of Sunken, digital copies are on drive-through, maybe itch at some point, but you can get the physical copies from my site directly from me. Throw in some extra goodies for you too, and we should have copies of the new edition of Butter Princess available there. I think they're also on Plus One.
You can get copies of Butter Princess. It's my game I love to sell at conventions. It is not my own. That Himbos of Myth and Metal and Down We Go are the 3 games that I'm like, you should get all 3 of these, and people do a lot of the time. It's great, and so. Awesome. I'm super excited to keep on getting to see all the great things that you're working on, playing them here on stream, and getting some of them in our store also too. This has been RPG Layout for Horrified Beginners and the Marginally Talented with Mike Martens. Go give him a follow over on Blue Sky or whatever social media platform you enjoy. If you're watching this in the VOD later, if you got any questions, again, feel free to leave a comment. It helps other people discover the stream, but it also helps us know what you need to know more about. If you like this type of workshop, we'd love to be doing one of these a month. Let us know who you think we should be talking to and what you think we should be talking to them about. And we would love to bring on more guests to share their wisdom. Mike, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks, everybody. And we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.